I never imagined that my world would come crashing down in the most unexpected way. It wasn't a loud crash, not a dramatic moment like in the movies. It was quieter, subtler, a whisper that tore through the very fabric of everything I thought I knew about my family. But the impact? Unbearable. It was an ordinary Sunday morning, the kind where everything felt routine. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping my tea, watching the sunlight spill through the curtains. It was the same peaceful, quiet life I had spent years building with my late husband. The same peaceful, quiet life I thought my family shared. My stepgrandson, Ryan, had always been a part of that picture. He wasn't just the child of my husband's daughter, he was someone I had watched grow from a shy boy into a young man with so much potential. I loved him like my own. That's why, when I noticed the phone buzzing on the table beside me, I didn't think twice about checking it. It was my stepgrandson's phone. Ryan had been staying with us for the past few weeks. His mother, my husband's daughter, had been going through a rough time, and I had offered to let him stay at our house while she worked through it. I had always done my best to care for him. So when I reached over and saw his name on the screen, I assumed it was something innocent. Maybe he needed help with his schoolwork or wanted to chat. But the message that appeared before my eyes would change everything. The text wasn't meant for me. But it was impossible to ignore. I miss you. I can't stop thinking about you. I need you. It's killing me to pretend like nothing is happening. I froze. My fingers, hovering over the screen, trembled. The words stung. They didn't make sense. The sender's name was Hannah. Hannah? Who was she? I knew all of Ryan's friends. None of them were named Hannah. As my mind raced, I told myself I had misunderstood. It had to be something innocent. Maybe a friend with the same name. Maybe a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew, this wasn't just an innocent message. This was something much worse. Something that could destroy everything. I stood up, heart pounding, and stumbled across the room. The moment felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. And yet, this was real. My stepgrandson, the boy I had watched grow up, had sent this message. And from the tone of it, he was the one who had been hiding something. What on earth had I missed? What had been happening behind my back? The truth was starting to creep up on me like a shadow, growing darker with every passing second. The last thing I expected to find was betrayal, especially from him. I met James when I was in my late 40s. He was charming, a little older than I was, but we clicked instantly. He had a steady job, a warm smile, and a history of family values that matched mine. He wasn't perfect, but to me, he was everything I needed at that time. When he introduced me to his daughter, Emily, I immediately felt a connection. Emily had a strong, no-nonsense attitude, and I admired her for it. She was an independent woman, someone who knew what she wanted in life. But the real twist came when Emily's son, Ryan, entered the picture. At first, I wasn't sure what to make of him. He was just a shy teenager, barely 16 when I met him. Ryan didn't talk much at first, preferring to keep to himself. But over time, I grew fond of him. I became the mother figure he never had, especially after his father had left when he was very young. Emily was always so caught up in her own world, trying to hold her life together, that she never had much time for him. I understood that. I understood him. Over the years, I watched Ryan transform from a withdrawn teenager into a handsome young man with a bright future ahead of him. He wasn't perfect, he made mistakes, like any other kid, but I saw potential in him. He was so much like James in so many ways, quiet, intelligent, and kind-hearted. I always believed that, with time, Ryan would figure things out, that he would overcome the rough patches and become someone I would be proud of. But that was before everything changed. Before I started to see the cracks in the facade. Before I saw the side of Ryan I never thought existed. When my husband passed away, it was devastating, and the grief left a gaping hole in my life. But despite that, I found myself taking comfort in my family. I still had Emily and Ryan, even though the relationship wasn't always perfect. There were tensions, of course. Ryan had his struggles with his mother, as teenagers often do, and I had my own set of issues as a widow, but we managed. And when Emily hit a rough patch in her personal life, I opened up my home to Ryan without hesitation. I wanted to be there for him, to give him the stability he needed during a time of uncertainty. But looking back now, I see how all the little signs of trouble started to slip by unnoticed, buried beneath the distractions of my own grief. Ryan's stay at our home was meant to be temporary, but it quickly became clear that something was different. The atmosphere in the house had shifted, but it wasn't just the weight of grief that had changed things. There was a growing tension, one I couldn't quite pinpoint, but it was there. And now, standing in the kitchen, reading those words on Ryan's phone, I could no longer ignore it. It started off small, the little things that I should have noticed but didn't. Ryan, who had always been a relatively quiet and respectful young man, began acting strangely distant. He spent more time in his room, keeping to himself, avoiding family meals, and rarely engaging in conversation. I assumed he was just going through a phase, dealing with the weight of the changes in his life. After all, moving in with me, away from his mother, was a big adjustment. But as time passed, I realized it was more than that. His behavior wasn't just about isolation. It was subtle, an odd reluctance to engage, a strange coolness in his manner, and sometimes, a nervousness that I hadn't seen before. There were moments when I'd catch him looking at me from across the room, as if he were afraid of being caught, but I couldn't figure out why. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overthinking things. But in the back of my mind, a small voice kept nagging at me, urging me to trust my instincts. Something was off. Then there were the times when Ryan would disappear for hours, only to return home with no explanation. His excuses were vague, like he was hanging out with friends or studying at the library. I didn't press him for details. After all, he was 20 years old, and I didn't want to be the overbearing step-grandmother who snooped into his personal life. But there was something about his evasiveness that unsettled me. I knew deep down that Ryan wasn't just hiding his whereabouts, he was hiding something far more significant. The final red flag came one evening when I noticed his phone screen light up in the middle of dinner. Normally, Ryan was a private person, but when his phone pinged, he immediately picked it up and glanced at the message with an intensity I hadn't seen before. He quickly locked it and shoved the phone back into his pocket, avoiding eye contact with me. At that moment, I knew something was wrong. I had seen the same nervous, defensive behavior from him before, but I had never been able to put my finger on it. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the truth, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Ryan's behavior wasn't just strange, it was as if he was hiding a secret, and that secret was about to surface in a way that would tear my family apart. I couldn't stop thinking about that text message. I miss you. I can't stop thinking about you. I need you. It's killing me to pretend like nothing is happening. Those words kept echoing in my mind as I tried to go about my day. What was I supposed to do? I wasn't sure, but I knew I had to find out more. Later that evening, while Ryan was out running errands, I made a decision that would change everything. I grabbed his phone from the table, my heart racing with fear and anticipation. I knew I was crossing a line, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to know the truth. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the phone, navigating to his messages. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't a snoop, and I had always prided myself on giving Ryan the privacy he deserved. But something told me this was different. Something told me I couldn't ignore it any longer. As I scrolled through his messages, I found the conversation with Hannah again. She was the same person who had sent the message earlier, and now I could see just how deep this relationship ran. There were messages filled with longing, desire, and emotions that were far beyond what one would expect from a family member. My stomach twisted in knots as I read the words, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Ryan's messages were just as intimate, filled with confessions and promises to meet. I felt my heart drop as the truth began to sink in. My stepgrandson was having an affair that wasn't just with any woman, but with someone he was deeply involved with. The worst part? It was happening under my roof. Ryan had been carrying on this secret relationship, and I had been completely oblivious. I felt a rush of emotions, betrayal, confusion, disbelief, all swirling inside me. How could I have missed this? How could I have been so blind to the signs? The more I read, the more the gravity of the situation hit me. This wasn't just a fling or a harmless crush. This was a full-blown affair, and Ryan had been lying to me, hiding it right under my nose. I had welcomed him into my home, trusted him like my own family, and he had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with questions, but there was one that stood out above the rest. Why? Why would Ryan do this? What could have driven him to betray me, his family, like this? I knew I had to confront him. But part of me was terrified. What if I was wrong? What if this wasn't what I thought it was? But deep down, I knew. This was real. And I was about to uncover the full extent of Ryan's betrayal. I sat there, in a daze, staring at the phone in my hands. The screen seemed to taunt me, offering no answers, only more questions. Every message I read felt like a punch to the gut. My head was spinning, and I could feel my emotions rising like a tidal wave. Betrayal. Deception. The more I uncovered, the worse it became. Ryan's affair wasn't just a passing moment. It had been going on for months. The intensity of his feelings for Hannah was undeniable. They had plans to run away together, to start a new life. The messages weren't just about physical attraction, they were filled with promises of love, of building a future together. And what hurt the most was realizing that none of this had anything to do with me. Ryan hadn't just hidden his secret affair from me, he had hidden it from his family. But the truth didn't stop there. As I dug deeper, I began to uncover more disturbing details. Ryan wasn't the only one involved in this betrayal. Hannah, the woman he was so desperately in love with, was someone I knew. I'd seen her around, always with a smile, always so friendly and charming. She had been coming around for family gatherings, acting like just another one of the gang. And yet, behind that sweet exterior, she was the one who had turned my life upside down. She wasn't just a distant acquaintance. She was someone I had welcomed into my home, someone I trusted. The emotional weight of this revelation hit me like a tidal wave. How had I been so blind? How had I allowed this woman into my life, only to have her betray me in such a hurtful, unimaginable way? The house felt empty as I waited for Ryan to come home. My mind was a whirlwind, and the guilt from snooping through his phone weighed heavily on me. I could still hear the words from the texts echoing in my mind. I need you. It's killing me to pretend like nothing is happening. It felt like I had been blindsided by a truth I wasn't ready to face. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much it shattered the foundation of everything I believed about our family. When I heard the front door open, my heart skipped a beat. Ryan was home. I stood up immediately, my pulse racing as I made my way toward the living room. He looked at me with the same familiar, youthful expression, but there was something in his eyes that seemed distant, like he already knew I had discovered something. His nonchalant smile didn't fool me. I could tell by the way he avoided my gaze that he wasn't ready for what was coming. "Ryan," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk." He froze for a moment, the air between us heavy with unspoken tension. He closed the door behind him, hesitated, then dropped his bag on the floor. "What's going on?" His voice sounded casual, but I could hear the faintest edge to it, like he was already preparing for the worst. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The words spilled out before I could stop them. "Why are you doing this to me? To your family?" I found the messages. Ryan. Hannah. What the hell is going on? His face went pale. For a moment, there was silence, uncomfortable, suffocating silence. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to come up with some explanation, but I wasn't about to give him the chance to lie anymore. How long, Ryan? How long has this been going on? My voice broke, a wave of anger and heartbreak washing over me. I took you in. I opened my home to you. And this is how you repay me? Ryan's eyes flickered, then dropped to the floor. He didn't answer right away. It was like he was trying to decide how to spin the story, how to manipulate the truth. But I wasn't going to let him. I didn't mean for it to happen, he muttered finally, his voice barely above a whisper. It just did. I didn't think you'd find out. I thought I could keep it hidden. Hidden. I repeated, my chest tightening. You thought you could hide this from me. I trusted you, Ryan. I loved you like my own grandson. And you let me believe that everything was fine, when all this time you were betraying us? He shifted uncomfortably, looking around the room as though searching for something to hold on to, but there was nothing. The walls closed in on him, and it was clear that he was unraveling. I never wanted to hurt you, Grandma. You were always there for me, he said, his voice cracking with guilt. But I couldn't help it. I love her. I love Hannah. I stood there, stunned, the weight of his words hitting me like a slap. Hannah? I asked incredulously. How could you do this to me? And to your own mother? Ryan was silent, his eyes welling up with tears. For the first time, I saw him as a lost boy, confused and trapped in a situation of his own making. But that didn't make it any easier to swallow. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice full of regret. I never wanted it to go this far. It happened, and I couldn't stop it. The truth was finally out in the open, but it didn't bring me any relief. The shock and the pain were overwhelming. How could I have missed it? How could I have welcomed this betrayal into my home? But then, just as I thought the conversation was nearing its painful end, Ryan said something that made my blood run cold. There's more, Grandma, he whispered, his voice trembling. There's something else I need to tell you. I felt the floor beneath me tilt, like the foundation of my entire world was crumbling. What do you mean? My voice was barely a whisper, but I already knew this wasn't over. Ryan's eyes were full of shame, but also something else, a kind of desperation that made my stomach churn. He didn't want to say it, but I could tell he knew it was the only way to come clean. It's not just Hannah. I'm seeing someone else. Someone else in the family. I felt the room spin, my body swaying with the force of his words. For a moment, I couldn't process it. I stared at him, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. What? What do you mean, someone in the family? Ryan dropped his head, unable to meet my eyes anymore. It's Emily. Your daughter. Mom found out, and that's why things have been so tense between us. We were both trying to hide it from you. I didn't know how to tell you, Grandma. It was all falling apart, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like I had been struck by lightning. My daughter. My own flesh and blood? The thought of my son, the man I raised, now involved in something so twisted, it made my head spin. No, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. No, this can't be happening. Not my daughter, Ryan. You can't be serious. You're lying. But the look in his eyes told me everything. He wasn't lying. The pain on his face mirrored the gut-wrenching ache in my own chest. I never wanted to hurt anyone, Grandma, he pleaded, his voice breaking. I swear. But I didn't know what to do. It was all spinning out of control. And I didn't think anyone would understand. I was speechless. My body was frozen, my mind struggling to process the weight of what Ryan had just confessed. Emily. My own daughter. I had never, in a million years, imagined that my family would be capable of such betrayal. How had we gotten here? How had everything fallen apart so quickly? The silence between us stretched on, thick and suffocating. I couldn't bring myself to speak, not at first. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? The anger, the shock, the heartbreak, it was all too much to contain. I had trusted him. I had trusted her. How could you? I whispered, my voice trembling. How could both of you betray me like this? Ryan fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to hurt you. I didn't know what to do. But I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive him. I wasn't sure if I could forgive either of them. My family had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have ever imagined. My trust, my love, it had all been shattered. And the worst part? I still didn't know if I could ever put the pieces back together. Would I ever be able to look at Ryan, or Emily, the same way again? Would our family ever be whole again, or had everything changed forever? As I looked at Ryan, kneeling before me, broken and begging for forgiveness, I realized something I had never expected to confront. I had no answers. Only questions. Only pain. And it was far from over. This twist left me grappling with not just betrayal from Ryan, but from the very core of my family. It was a heartbreaking, brutal revelation, and it was only just the beginning of the emotional toll that would follow. The silence that hung between us felt suffocating. I stood there, paralyzed, struggling to breathe through the heaviness of the moment. Ryan, still kneeling on the floor, his face stained with tears, didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. The words were out now. The truth was no longer hidden, and with it, my world had been shattered beyond repair. I wanted to say something, anything, that would make sense of this horror, but nothing came to mind. How could I make sense of this? My family, my flesh and blood, had betrayed me in ways I couldn't begin to fathom. My stepgrandson, the boy I had raised as my own, had crossed a line I never thought possible. And my daughter, Emily, the woman who had been my closest ally, my confidant, was part of this twisted mess too. It felt like the ground beneath me had crumbled, and I was left in freefall, unsure of where I would land. Ryan didn't look up at me. His tears continued to flow, his body trembling as if the weight of his confession had finally caught up with him. He had broken the trust I had placed in him, and that was something I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. But at the same time, I saw the boy I had loved and cared for, still there, lost, confused, and filled with regret. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, but it felt impossible. The devastation was all-consuming. How was I supposed to move forward from this? Could I ever forgive him? Could I forgive Emily? I sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. I thought about everything I had lost, the innocence of family bonds, the trust I had placed in people who were supposed to be the closest to me. Could I really walk away from this? Or would I be doomed to live in the aftermath of this betrayal, never knowing if we could ever rebuild? Ryan's voice broke through my thoughts. "Grandma, please," he begged. "I know I've ruined everything. I'm so sorry. Please, just give me a chance to make it right." I looked at him, my heart aching. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that people could change, that he could redeem himself, but the reality was harsh. Could I ever look at him the same way again? Could I ever trust him? And what about Emily? Would I ever be able to face her without feeling that same gut-wrenching betrayal? The truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know if forgiveness was even possible. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and pain, all blending into one overwhelming force. There was a part of me that wanted to walk away, to cut ties and never look back. But another part of me, the part that had always loved and cared for Ryan, the part that had opened my home to him, the part that had given him a second chance, couldn't simply turn away. The wounds were deep, and they would take time to heal, but I wasn't sure if time would ever be enough. I don't know what to do, Ryan, I whispered, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I don't know if I can just turn my back on you either. He nodded, understanding that there were no easy answers. His face was pale, filled with regret and shame, but he didn't argue. He didn't try to justify his actions. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was nothing left to say. The pain was too raw. The damage too severe. And as I sat there in the silence, a thought began to form in my mind, one that terrified me. What kind of family would we be if we couldn't find a way to heal? What would happen to us, to this family, if forgiveness never came? Could we ever move past this betrayal, or would it define us forever? I didn't have the answers. But what I did know was this: life was never as simple as I once believed. People made mistakes, sometimes devastating ones, and sometimes, the wounds never fully heal. But the question lingered, unanswered: was there still a chance for us, or had this betrayal fractured us beyond repair? And as I looked at Ryan, his face still wet with tears, I realized that the truth wasn't simple. It was complicated, messy, and painful. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but one thing was clear: our family would never be the same again. Would I ever be able to forgive him? Would we ever find a way back to the love and trust we once shared? The answer wasn't something I could find today. But for now, all I could do was sit in the silence, knowing that the journey toward healing, whatever it looked like, had only just begun.